If you've hung around this channel for a bit, you might know I have my niches, areas of knowledge I would say I'm relatively proficient with. For example, retro video scaling, old survival horror games, and now that I think about it, not much else. Well, today we will be operating completely outside of those boundaries. Today we cover what I assume is the product of an unthinking, unfeeling Capcom executive seeing the success of Super Smash Bros. And assuming they could snag a portion of those profits if they sloppily put together a similar type of experience. Oh, overzealous, profit-driven decision-making, thy name be Capcom. Well, hopefully you guys are down for joining me as we jump into very unfamiliar waters, because if there's one thing I know, it's that misery loves company. Minasan, Onimusha Retrospective e yokozo.
We still have Jubei. Nothing good will come out of you dying here. While there is life, there is hope.
Jubei?
That's right.
Normally, I'd spend the first section of these videos going over the development process for a game and maybe some interesting events that might have led to its creation, but that seems a little extraneous here. After all, the motivation behind Blade Warriors may as well have been printed on the back of the box. Smash Brawl had topped the charts for Nintendo, and Capcom just wanted to muscle in on their territory. I assume they picked a franchise that would fit into this odd genre fighting game with the least amount of alterations, and I guess a series of games filled with sword-fighting demon slayers was just an obvious fit. So instead of talking about little factoids that may or may not exist concerning this game's development, let's talk about an equally anemic subject, its story.
We have to stop them at any cost.
Yes. I am searching for Nobunaga too.
I'm not trying to come across as being too negative from the very start, but let's be real here. This is a story in a fighting game. Not only is it nothing special, but if you expected it to be more than that, well, I'd say the problem lies with you. Each of the playable characters in Blade Warriors is given a general motivation, like Eke being tired of boozing and woman chasing, or Jubei hearing about Samanosuke and looking to find out more about his Oni affiliations. The only problem being that generic story setup will be the only actual story you'll get. Each character gets a short cutscene at the start, and, well, that's that. No text crawl at the end, no bookend to their story, just a single motivating thought.
Disgusting humans. Pigs. They do nothing but disturb my experiments.
Throughout a story mode playthrough, no matter who you pick, you'll follow a similar path. A single story cutscene at the start, and then a few boss introductions, followed by a scene made especially for a character, created specifically for this game. Their stories don't cross over with each other, and this being a spin-off and a fighting game, obviously nothing happens here that would affect the main timeline of the series. Now, obviously none of us should be expecting a Smash clone to include a riveting narrative, but even with lowered expectations, I feel like we got gypped here. We couldn't have got at least a closing story scene for some of these characters. Of course, I understand guys like the Genma Grunt wouldn't exactly have an epic conclusion to his story, but I feel like not taking advantage of the freedom something like this provides is just a storytelling sin. There could have been a cool non-canon event that brought all these characters together, something that would explain why Kotaro, Oyu, and Samanosuke would be fighting each other. Of course, I get I shouldn't have expected much here, but I feel like it's just negligent to not capitalize on a situation like this. Given how cheap the cutscenes feel here, the fact that they couldn't get a majority of the original English voice cast to reprise their roles, and a lack of any and all closing story dumps, well, I've got to assume a very small amount of funds was allocated to this project, and possibly an even smaller amount of time. So I guess I could be happy things didn't turn out any more disappointing than they did. Listen, at this point the game really has me questioning myself. On one end, my actual job is the art of being overly critical of elements found in video games and getting lost analyzing them, but on the other, this is a Smash clone wearing the skin of an Onimusha title. Is it me who has the problem here for expecting it to have any kind of story at all? Am I spending more time criticizing this element of the game than the developers actually put into crafting it? All questions I'd love to have answers to. But existential crisis aside, I guess my final word on the matter would have to be this. I'm not sure if I'm being an ass or the game is, but either way, don't expect Blade Warrior's story to be a driving factor if you do plan on playing this game.
If you're that bored, why don't you find yourself a woman?
Darn right.
Okay, so moving on to a subject that's a little easier to talk about. Blade Warriors plays like what it looks like. The developers took a little more than inspiration from Nintendo's Smash franchise and pretty much copied nearly everything it had to offer. We've got multi-person brawls spanning stages that have tiered layouts while damage dealing or player buffing items spawn in. Really, the only thing missing is the ring out mechanic. That being said, there are some new ideas included here that break that Smash Bros. Mold, or really, now that I think about it, I haven't cared about a Smash game since the Bush Jr. era. Maybe some of the things I'm about to talk about actually do exist in the series now. Well, either way, the game has a pretty wide variety of playable characters to work with, including series faves like Eke, Kotaro, Kaede, and some nerd created specifically for this game. And no, I haven't unlocked anyone. I would say it's because of a time crunch or something, but really, I think apathy is more to blame. Once you choose your fighter, you get the first hints at what you'll be doing in between fights, but we'll talk about that after we've covered the basics. When a fight starts, you'll be faced with a familiar enough situation if you get into the Smash titles. There are multi-tiered level layouts, giving most arenas a bit of verticality, and as you play, you'll be facing off against several foes at a time. For attacks, obviously characters are going to vary in minor ways, but mostly everyone just plays like they would in an Onimusha game. There's a single damage dealing combo activated by about 4 hits of the square button, a kick that breaks guard mapped to the triangle, soul sucking can be done with circle, and guarding and locking on is mapped to L1 and R1 respectively. To be honest though, I never really got why anyone would lock onto an enemy. I mean, sure, you can utilize a dash move that'll automatically put your character behind the enemy, but this is very finicky. The distance you'll need to be at for this to work and not just act as a short step forward is static, but since your foes will be moving around constantly, it can be very easy to misjudge. I opted to stay away from locking on for the most part, since you can move much faster when not locked onto an enemy, and in a game that requires this much mobility and includes this many simultaneous bad guys, the inclusion of this lock-on mechanic just seems really weird. Much like the mainline Onimusha entries, defeating foes will net you souls that can be absorbed, and those souls can be later spent on either upgrading your strength, defense, or magic. As you spend those souls, you can increase your character's overall level, which comes with a change of clothes, which, if I'm being honest, is a little more than I would have expected. Staying on this screen, there are items that can be found after completing certain milestones, like absorbing a certain amount of souls or clearing a few floors in the Phantom Realm. You can equip these items during a playthrough, and they offer bonuses like negating status effects or buffing stats. Items can also be purchased at certain intervals from this caterpillar guy from the series. Here you can snag some healing items, a talisman that'll let you respawn from death once, and power jewels that permanently raise a character's HP. The currency used here is a type of soul that comes from certain enemies, and that pool of resources does carry over into other playthroughs, which sort of gives the game this grindy kind of appeal, and truth be told, it's what I enjoyed the most. I spent a lot of time beating the story mode over and over again with the same character, leveling them up and seeing how far I could get in the Phantom Realm. I'm not sure why, but something about it was very zen-like, really sort of captured what I like so much about grinding in turn-based RPGs. Yeah, it's certainly mindless and incredibly repetitive, but I'll be damned if I didn't actually enjoy it. It seems to me enemies sort of level with you, or at least they do in the Phantom Realm, so you won't be cleaning house after a single playthrough of story mode, which is nice and further contributes to that grind I was talking about. Even though I wasn't necessarily very interested in getting every character to max level, seeing those stats go up and the change in their attire just sort of compelled me. It also helped that they gave the Genma characters their own story mode with them coming up against the Oni. A little something that shows there was at least some effort put into this thing. On top of the typical stuff you'd expect in a fighting game, you get some familiar Onimusha elements. For example, you can use magic attacks just like the one found in the main series, only this time they're not always available and can only be used when the corresponding orb is absorbed. Why did I write that? Why did I write the word orb and absorb right next to each other? For some reason, past me is always looking to screw future me over. This makes for a one-time use magic attack and can really turn the tables in a fight that's not going your way. The Isen attacks from the main series are also here, and they work exactly like you're used to. Attacking just a few frames before an enemy attack lands will net you an Isen, which seems to be an instant kill for most foes and of course nets you more souls than usual. The guard Isen also makes a return, which is where you hit the guard button just as an attack is going to land and then hit attack just after it's been deflected. With both of these, I found that actually performing them on reaction in a zoomed out arena filled to the brim with people swinging swords, using magic and firing guns, well, it's really damn hard. Most of my Isens outside of the training menu came from randomly mashing attack and getting one by luck, something that actually happened pretty consistently against Nobunaga, the last boss of the story mode. Of course, you'll also find more Smash related features like randomly spawning buffs, weapons, and usable items. In story mode, you won't see any actual weapons show up. For some reason, those are reserved for versus mode, but you will find whole screen clearing magic attacks, health and magic refills, damage dealing stuff like shurikens and bombs, plus the odd attack negating status effect. These can be fun to use, but the computer will almost always get to them first, and it is incredibly annoying. Speaking of annoying and this game's AI, in story mode, higher level baddies will absorb souls too, making for a very frustrating time when your goal is to absorb a certain amount of victory souls. You could be right there almost finished with your soul quota, but a few guys spawn in who will keep sucking up the souls from your kills. And the same goes for health restoring yellow souls. You might find yourself on the verge of death and that sweet yellow soul is right within reach, and some jerk comes along and steals it right from under your nose. On that same subject, I'd go ahead and recommend not trying to absorb any souls at any point ever. If you have even the slightest bit of distance between you and the enemy, sure, it can work. But if they're even remotely close to you, they turn into absolute animals while you're holding that circle button down. Honestly, I tested it. You can stand near an opponent under regular circumstances and expect them to act and move around the screen in a way that seems to make sense. They're not keeping away from you, but they do seem to be tuned to allow just a bit of leeway on your end. However, when you even so much as move your thumb near the circle button, you can expect every single enemy in the map to be en route to your current location, and the ones that are already there start behaving much more aggressively. Really, I found the story mode as a whole to be incredibly inconsistent as far as difficulty goes, with some characters getting past the final boss fight as a near impossibility, while others had me beating them with ease. And sure, character stats play a role, but the randomness is more to blame. Sometimes I would die a few times against a boss, and then for some reason the next retry has me easily handing them their ass. RNG seems to be in some kind of absolute form of chaotic randomness here. Fights can be way too easy or almost insurmountable, and for seemingly no reason. To be honest though, it's kinda hard to really describe what's going on here without bracing for the obvious "get good" comment. And yeah, sure, I'm definitely not what you would call a master of this game or these types of games, but I've beaten it more than 8 times altogether, and you'd figure at some point fights would come down to good planning, spacing, execution, and skill, but more often than not, I was just lucky enough to not have items spawn near enemies. So story mode is about as fun as any story mode is in any fighting game, that is to say not very. But you can't run a Smash clone on story missions alone, so let's delve into the real meat of this game, its versus options. And in that realm, you have 2 separate choices. You can either use a standard versus mode that has every character their base stats, or a custom versus mode which keeps the stats you leveled in story mode while also letting you use upgraded weapons. The latter seems to be the least balanced and probably most fun out of the 2, but I could see it becoming the starting point for a lot of lost friendships. After all, if a buddy wants to play with a character you haven't leveled up yet, they stand almost no chance against you. Before getting into a match, there are the expected modifiers like controlling how often items will spawn, how and when matches can be completed, whether or not souls can be absorbed, and toggles for every single item in the game. Thinking back though, I really haven't played a Smash game for myself since Brawl, so I could be wrong, but this seems about on par with Nintendo's offering in that sense. Picking a character is a little weird with the fighter selection screen being so small and partitioned into 4 different pieces. I mean, you basically copied Smash with the story mode version of this screen, why not just include a few more cursors on that same screen for other players? It's really kind of odd. Clearly Capcom wanted a carbon copy of Nintendo Smash Bros, but then decided to not copy some features, and all of them seemed to be the stuff that would have made the game much better.
I once fought with a man who could draw demon souls. You fight as well as he did.
Annoyingly, when using a custom versus game, you need to load a memory card profile for each of the 4 players before using those custom characters, which is understandable. Some people might bring their own memory cards over to play their own custom leveled Samanosuke, but this is still a tiring process to go through each time you want to play the game. Now, not only do I not have 4 friends willing to play something like this with me, but I'm not entirely sure I have 4 friends, so you won't be hearing about how much that changes the flow of the game. But I did get in a few matches with my wife, and they're, I don't know, fun enough? Like I said before, this really isn't my cup of tea in the first place. I've never liked Smash games, instead preferring your more typical 2D fighters. Now don't get me wrong, I understand how entertaining high-level competitive Smash can be to watch, but I just never really enjoyed playing it myself. And as far as this game goes specifically, I guess just imagine a Smash game but with a quarter of the budget, and whatever you're picturing right now is likely right on the money. So maybe I'm not the kind of guy who should be reviewing this game, but hey, you guys came here, so really this is your fault. And I want you to sit there and think about all the harm you've caused. Okay, so I'm gonna come clean. I have absolutely no idea what to say here. You guys know I love going on and on about the way games look, but what am I judging here? It's a Smash clone. I feel like that's a fitting description of the game's story, gameplay, presentation, and just about anything else you could imagine. I will say though, I like that the camera zooms in and out based on how many characters were on screen in story mode, but that meant I wasn't able to travel outside the general area the camera covered, so if a chest just materialized and it's right outside of frame, forget about it. It's basically dead to you until you can bait some enemy into following in its direction. If I'm forced to give out compliments, I'd say some of the levels can be very good looking. Of course, it's not all too impressive, but the artistry is clearly here. Characters use lower detail 3D models than what you'd find in the mainline entries they feature in, but like you would imagine, that's more than enough most of the time. During the intro sequences and cutscenes introducing bosses, you can really see that this is the case, but it's not a horrible look, just a little less good looking than they were in their own games. Keeping up with the positives, I never saw any significant or noticeable slowdown even when the screen was full of combatants, souls, and magic spells. I also really like that there's a visual difference when you level up and that each weapon is modeled so you can see your equipment changes reflected in actual combat. On the strange side of things, using the RetroTink 5X's adaptive deinterlacing mode to convert the PS2's 480i output to 1440p results in these weird horizontal lines on the edges of vertical boundaries. Now, I've seen a lot of PS2 games going through an adaptive deinterlacing solution between the FrameMeister and the Tink 5X, but I can't remember ever getting any results like this. I thought that was really interesting for all the wrong reasons, but it's really not a big deal. The Tink 5X offers a lot of deinterlacing options, and the weave method seemed to clear things right up. And honestly, that's all I can think of. I mean, sure, there are graphical elements to talk about, but like I said before, you probably already know what this game looks like after just hearing what it's based on. It's nowhere near a bad-looking game, but instead looks about right for what was likely a very small budget. There's a lot of areas where you can see a real lack of effort, funding, or both, and these don't add up to a poor presentation, but it's definitely not something you would expect to come from Capcom, especially with this being attached to a series that was doing relatively okay at the time. So in the realm of presentation, my statement is thus: Onimusha Blade Warriors has graphics, and that's about all I'm willing to say with any kind of certainty.
Very well. I shall tell you my name. I am Kogandantes, the greatest swordsman of the demon world. Ready or not, here I come.
Well guys, that is about all there is to say. Now trust me, I did want to dive in deep with this one, but there's just nothing to find. Like I said before, that doesn't mean it's a bad game, but it feels and looks low budget and only delivers what I would call the bare minimum required to be a Smash clone. Of course, it is great to see Onimusha concepts like Isen, soul absorbing, and stat leveling make its way so smoothly into such an odd environment, but I just don't care enough. I most definitely started out with a bias since I've never really enjoyed the series this game is taking its inspiration from, but I did go into this wanting to find a pleasant surprise. Sadly though, there's just not much else here aside from what you would expect. Hey, maybe I'm just not the guy to be looking at something like this, and it is very possible that some of you in the comment section can tell me exactly why this is an incredibly balanced or technical fighter, but as it is now, I'm just not very impressed. Of course, none of us should have expected to be. I doubt many of you heard this concept and thought to yourself, maybe this will be my next favorite video game. So maybe keep your expectations in check if you do end up wanting to check Blade Warriors out. But for those of you who aren't interested, don't worry, you're not missing out on anything special. Well guys, that's about it here, but do check back in because up next we have the final entry in the Onimusha series to date and the last video in this retrospective. But until then, minasan, arigatou gozaimashita. Hey guys, thanks for checking in on an old man. If you get into full series retrospectives like this, maybe support more of them by checking out my Patreon page or just leaving a like or a comment. Little things like that help out more than you guys know. Well, I'm gonna get out of here, but I hope all of you have an awesome day. In fact, that's a damn order. You have to.